How are we feeling about the Monstrilio t-shirt? I think it's pretty neat, but it's also a spoiler for one of the books that I'm going to review in this video. Hi, I'm Ben, welcome to my channel and to a video that is not my July wrap-up because I read 10 books in July and I just haven't had the time to write my reviews for all 10 of them, and it was really holding me back from making this video. So today I'm just gonna cover the books that I am ready to review and the rest which I am really excited to tell you about, but those ones will follow in a future video. These are all books that I read over the summer, and it got me thinking about what makes a summer book. I don't think I'm particularly someone who tries to align their reading to a season specifically. I mean, sometimes I do. I like to read sort of Christmassy stuff only around Christmas because it feels a bit weird and incongruous to read it at any other time. And when I go on a holiday, it's really nice to read something that somehow relates to the country that I'm visiting. But by and large, I'm a believer in reading whatever you want, whenever you want, regardless of whether it's seasonally appropriate. But I do think there are two types of summer read. One is the sort of beach read, the page turner, the easy reading that is not too taxing, that can be interrupted at any time by a quick dip in the sea. And there are some of those here, I think, in this list of books that I've got today. The other type are books that give you that feeling of summer, that sweaty, sticky feeling that comes with a hot summer's day. Unless, of course, like me, you live in the UK and it's August and currently raining. But I can still imagine what summer feels like. And again, a couple of the books that I've got here are very much in that lane. So without further ado, let's get into the reviews. And the first book I'm going to review is Greta and Valdin by Rebecca R. Reilly. This is a much hyped novel from the Kiwi author and was released a few years ago in New Zealand, but had finally made the long journey to be released in the UK. Lots of people have been loving this, including Waterstones, because it made the shortlist for this year's Waterstones Debut Fiction Prize. I had been on the fence about it for a while, but I decided to give it a go on audio. It's narrated by a sister and brother, Greta, an academic, and Valdin, her brother, who was also once an academic, but is now a TV presenter for some sort of travel show. These siblings are mixed heritage with a Maori mother and a Russian father, and they are both gay. This is a setup ripe for lots of fun, and Reilly definitely has fun with it. We see the pair constantly having to spell out or explain their Russian surnames, the confusion of their teachers back in school when they're sent to Maori-related classes and events, and how they navigate queerness in their family, helped in part by the fact that they also have a gay uncle called Tony. The chapters alternate between the siblings, and we follow them through their trials and tribulations at work and in their love lives. Greta's dealing with this crush she has at work and has a bit of a will they won't they situation going on, while Valdin is still reeling from a serious relationship he had with an older man called Javier before he got cold feet and ran away from both that relationship and pretty much every other aspect of his life, including his academic life as a physicist. I know dual perspective novels are like 10 a penny at the moment, but it can be a risk sometimes because you might enjoy one character's voice more than the other, and so you spend half the book itching to get back to the character that you like. But I don't think that's the case here. I do think I enjoyed Valdin's story a little bit more, partly because it just resonated more for me as a gay man, but also because it had a few more strings to it. There was more complexity in his story. But yeah, I had a great time with both protagonists. I do kind of wish though that they had spent more time together, because while they mention each other a fair bit, they actually rarely interact with each other over the course of the book, despite living with each other. And that's for one reason or another in the plot, but it's quite fun to see them bounce off each other, and I wish there was a little bit more of it. And all of these characters are constantly bouncing off one another. It's very quippily written, characters constantly wisecracking, which I know is irksome for some, but really, really works for me. It was genuinely funny, but never felt like it undermined the moment. There are many moments of genuine emotional depth in the story, and Reilly wisely doesn't like shoehorn a one-liner into those just to get a cheap laugh. It's also plotted really well. There are plenty of character highs and lows, scenes ending at just the right time to keep you wanting more. And throughout the story, there are little mysteries and revelations that keep you interested. Like there's something that goes wrong off stage, the stage of the novel, while Valdin is filming an episode of his TV show, and you later find out what happened. And I found the conclusion of that really satisfying. My only real criticism of the book that did detract my enjoyment of it is that there were just so many characters, and lots of them have similar names or they have nicknames that they're known by. At times I struggled to keep track and remember who was related to whom and in what way. I know in the physical book there is a list of characters at the start, but that wasn't much use to me on audio. Overall though, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was great fun and I would definitely recommend it. Next then, I read Evenings and Weekends by Oisín McKenna. This is another one that everyone has been raving about, and I've heard lots of people call it the book of the summer. summer, and it's definitely a summer book. It takes place over one hazy weekend during a long, hot summer in June 2019. We're following a cast of characters in London. Ed and Maggie, a couple in their 30s who have recently found out they're expecting a baby. Maggie's best friend Phil, who has a casual sexual relationship with Keith, who is actually in an open relationship with another man, which Phil does know about. And then Phil's mother, who has recently been diagnosed with cancer. I think that covers the principal cast, but what it does is give the book a bit of a vibe that's like Love Actually if it was queer and set in summer. Gay, actually, if you will. We jump around between these different characters, each chapter in the close third person from a different perspective, and we experience their struggles and their personal dramas. This is all happening against the backdrop of a whale being stranded in the Thames, which did actually happen. So when I was reading it, I was like, oh yeah, I remember the whale, except it actually happened in 2004, and finding that out made me feel very old. The whale, along with the hot weather threatening to break, were I think pretty good metaphors, if a tad heavy-handed, for the tension bubbling up between the characters. And gosh, there is a lot of tension. I don't really want to describe what those things are because I think that's one of the propulsive things about the book. Things feel like they're going to bubble over or they're going to come to a head. And McKenna really knows how to set up a scene and then end it at just the right time so you are itching to find out what's going to happen. So I did find it a super page turner. But on the other hand, I don't know, I think there was something so basic about all of these conflicts. Every single one of them was just someone not telling another person something that they should tell them. The only difference between them was what the secret was. There were times when I was just like, tell them. One of you, please, just tell them. Because the way it was felt quite one note. And then towards the end, there was this particular climax to one of the storylines that just felt absolutely wild to me. Like, truly baffling decision making by the characters, and the thing that happened felt like a cheap shortcut to a very emotive action, and I just didn't buy it at all. I actually think the story would have been a lot more powerful if it just focused on Phil and his mum, because that to me was the stuff that worked best and was the most interesting. I think I'd recommend this for a beach read, but I don't think I was quite won over. I'm definitely in the minority though, because I know that people have been really enjoying this. Next, I read First Love by Gwendoline Reilly. I read this for July's Savage prompts that Simon and Louise Savage do, and July's prompt was to read a backlist novel by a favourite author. This may be a little bit of a cheat because I had only read My Phantoms by Reilly before, but I loved that book so much that I was ready to go out on a limb and call Reilly a favourite author. And I have been really looking forward to reading this one from her, so it was nice to have an excuse to prioritise it. Anyway, this is her 6th book, and it was a bit of a breakout success for her because it was shortlisted for a bunch of prizes, including the Goldsmiths Prize, the James Tate Black Memorial Prize, I always forget which order those words are said in, the Dylan Thomas Prize and the Women's Prize. Like My Phantoms, it's a short and microscopic character study, but where My Phantoms has a mother-daughter relationship at its centre, this one is about a marriage between two characters called Neve and Edwin. And my God, what a toxic marriage it is. This book is told from Neve's perspective, and she starts out telling us about her experience of moving into Edwin's home. The house is further from the hustle and bustle than she's used to, and she finds the experience of living there quite isolating, especially with Edwin often out at work. But when he's home, whether their interactions are happy or destructive is a total coin flip. Theirs is a marriage filled with made-up nicknames for each other, sometimes cloyingly sweet and at other times venomous and horrid. Edwin is very frequently just an outright villain, and there's one particular episode where Neve gets drunk and then Edwin gaslights and emotionally manipulates her, which is just horrendous. And because of things like that, it's blindingly obvious that Neve should absolutely get out of this relationship. But at the same time, there's a complexity to it because she is not innocent and she is very aware of what she's doing when she's spiteful to Edwin. She is often purposefully aiming to wound him and rile him up and to bring to the surface his bad behaviour. And a big part of that is her upbringing and what she recognises as love. The whole thing is intensely claustrophobic, and something about it is so theatrical. It feels like it would work really well on stage as a two-hander. And the reason for that is because the character work and the dialogue, as with My Phantoms, is just phenomenal. And not just between Neve and Edwin, because I say this book is about their marriage, and it mostly is, but Neve's parents loom large over the whole thing. Her abusive father is a menacing but almost pitiable presence, and her mother is such an interesting and comically tragic character. She is so indirect and avoidant, but she's also very needy and also quite dismissive. She was often comic relief for the story, but just felt so real. And that comic side to Neve's interactions with her mother definitely speaks to this darkly funny tone that underpins the whole book. So while it might be horrific to hear a woman told that she is, quote, a fishwife shrew with a face like a fucking arsehole that's had green acid shoved up it, it's also hard not to hear that as like dialogue from the thick of it or from Veep. Reilly has an ear for comedy, and I think it's really effective the way that butts right up against the darkness of the story and the relationship. I have to say that I was at times a little bit confused by the timelines. Neve's narrative jumped back and forth in time, and there were moments where I was unsure what happened in what order. I got a little bit confused sometimes, thinking that she had left Edwin and I was hearing a story from after the marriage. But then I realised I wasn't, and while it might have been an intentional hearkening to Neve experiencing some kind of memory soup, I don't think it added that much, and the book would have benefited from being a little bit clearer. Overall, not quite the heights of My Phantoms for me, but still a really cracking read. Next, I read Monstrilio by Gerardo Sámano Córdova. This is a new one from indie purveyors of weird fiction, Dead Ink. And I should mention that the book was gifted. I was very grateful to receive a copy, but the t-shirt was not. They did a cool like limited edition run on, I think it's called Everpress, and I thought the design of the book cover was really cool, so it would be nice to have a t-shirt of it too. This was actually published and raved about in the US last year, I think, but only just got released in the UK. I had been very excited to read about it based on what I'd heard, and then when I read the first page, I was instantly gripped. Its opening scene shows the dying moments of a child called Santiago as his mother and father hold him all huddled up in his single bed. It is heartbreaking and it's beautifully written. And then, of course, the book takes a strange turn. The first in a series of strange turns, really. It gets going very, very quickly when Santiago's mother Magos cuts out a piece of his lung and she keeps it in a jar. The lung is significant because Santiago only had one, and it was something he suffered with all of his short life. Then a housekeeper tells Magos a story about a small piece of a person growing into a full person, and well, Magos gets an idea, and maybe you've got an idea of where the story's going. But to be honest, I don't want to go too deeply into the plot because I think that is best experienced without knowing too much. What I will tell you though is that the book is told through 4 different perspectives, 1 part per person, and you know whose perspective you'll be spending time with from the very start because all 4 names are listed at the start of each section. I find perspective and perception really interesting tools for writers to play with, and I think it's done really well here. We get an idea of who each person is, and then each time we shift to a new perspective, we learn something new and surprising, either about the person that we are now with or the person that we've just left. And for me, there were definitely some surprises that had me completely rethink who that person was, and I had to adjust to a new normal, and that was a really interesting reading experience. I really like what this book is doing with its themes. It's completely absurd, but the way it evokes destruction and decay and how we hold on to things despite that was quite moving. You see it in Magos's mother's house, which is falling apart, and you see it with the identikit replacement of Magos's childhood dog, which throws her when she first goes home. It's actually really smart foreshadowing of the dead returning, the same but different. And I just loved the idea of this story being a thought experiment in manifesting grief as a physical thing. Grief is something that is and can be comforting, to sit in and spend time with the memories of our loved ones, but it can also be destructive. This book is about how grief as a more tangible thing can exist between people and mean different things to the loved ones that remain. It's queer, it's full of horror, it's a family drama, and I just really enjoyed it. Super, super stuff. I didn't realise until just now how much queer fiction I've been reading, but another one up next with Anyone's Ghost by August Thompson. This is a debut novel and one that was kindly sent to me by the publisher. It's a story where you know the outcome from the very start. Jake, one of the central characters, is going to die. It even mentions it on the back. We get a quick glimpse of this at the start of the novel, and then it's structured around 3 car crashes that Jake is involved in, the third being the one that kills him. The book is narrated not by Jake though, but by another man called Theron, who has this really complicated relationship with Jake. I think the book starts out really strong. At the beginning of the first section, Theron is describing returning back to New Hampshire and how he came to be splitting his time between there and California. You really quickly get immersed in this world, and it gave me like the Secret History vibes, and as you may appreciate, those vibes are pretty exciting vibes. However, this may make me unpopular, but I'm sad to say I just did not enjoy this. First off, while I do not need characters to be likeable, if you are going to write a book about the magnetic desire you have for someone, I need to at least believe that they are desirable or understand why you desire them. I could not understand that in the slightest in this novel. Jake, to me, was a very difficult, confused, and all-round terrible person. I think the book wanted me to want them to be together, to be seen as these star-crossed lovers who couldn't be, but all I wanted was for Theron to get as far away from him as possible. I also found the whole thing a bit overwritten. There were just too many overwrought descriptions, and a number of them had me roll my eyes. I actually had to put the book down for a few minutes during this scene where they're using Google Maps and it was doing the sort of voiceover in the car. And this was described as the sat-nav spitting out translated binary. I mean, yes, computers are all binary when you dig deep enough. What you're watching right now is translated binary. It's just such an odd and unnaturally specific description, and for me that epitomised the clumsiness of the prose. I will say, if you look at the Goodreads reviews, I am very much alone in this line of thinking, because even some of the negative reviews say that it has this beautiful prose. So it's very possible you'll get on with this a lot better than I did. And to finish on a more positive note, I also appreciated some of the observations about queerness and how confusing that can feel as a young person, the mixing up of feelings of admiration and desire, and not being able to pass and recognise those feelings and their differences because you've got nobody to talk to about them and with no reference points. I recognise that as a very authentic experience. Sadly, it was within a book that I just didn't enjoy. The last book I'm going to review is Goodnight Tokyo by Atsuhiro Yoshida, translated from Japanese by Haydn Trowell. This is a new book from Europa Editions, who kindly gifted me a proof to take on my trip to Japan. Yes, the vlog is coming soon, I swear. I did start this on my trip, but I didn't get around to finishing it, and so I just started it again in July, and I had a rather lovely time with it. The book is about a taxi driver called Matsui and his interactions with his passengers, but also slices of his passengers' lives more generally when he's not around. I think to understand this book, you do need to understand a little bit about well, not understand, but have like quite a specific picture of what a taxi driver is, because Matsui is not like a gritty New York cab driver or a cheeky chappy London cabbie or an immigrant trying to earn some money in a new country. Instead, he's like an old school Tokyo taxi driver who wears a suit and tie, and his worth as a driver is very much tied to his success in serving his passengers. And that's no value judgment on different types of taxi drivers. I think it just frames Matsui and his story a little bit differently. Anyway, I got a bit down a rabbit hole there. But this book is made up of a bunch of overlapping stories. We start with a woman who works for a film production company, and she has a job that is to procure lots of very specific items. At the start, for instance, she's asked to find some loquat fruits. She calls on Matsui to help her, and he drives around the city trying to find some loquats in the dead of night. And when they finally find a loquat tree, there is already someone in it, and she's a self-named loquat thief. The next chapter follows the loquat thief and her search for her long-lost brother, and so on, all of these city lives ricocheting off one another in quite a satisfying way. In the afterword of the book, Atsuhiro Yoshida describes this as a collection of serial short stories, stories that at first glance seem like isolated tales and can be read as such, but are actually linked and can be read as a novel. I actually kind of disagree somewhat that this is what this is, because I think there are very clear overarching narratives that cross many of the stories, and for me, some of the later ones just wouldn't make sense without having read the earlier ones. It definitely felt like a novel in stories more than a short story collection or serial short stories. For some reason, each story starts at 1 a.m. and at first I started to wonder if this was the same 1 a.m. every time and it was doing a kind of catch-22 multiple perspectives of the same night kind of thing. And then I thought maybe it was consecutive days and we were just checking in at 1 a.m. each time, but it was actually less constraining than that. Each story, whichever day it was, started at 1 a.m. I don't know that it added a ton, but I guess it was fun to try and see the author find a different way to say the clock struck 1 a.m. 10 times in a row. Overall, I'd say I was very charmed by the book, and I probably enjoyed it more than all of the other Japanese fiction I read recently. It was cozy without being too whimsical or sickly sweet, and I really enjoyed how this web of character connections became something of a hat tip to fate. A really nice one to turn to if you're into Japanese fiction. So those are my summer reads and my reviews of them. I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts. I would love to hear yours if you have read any of them as well, or if there's ones that you are particularly looking forward to, do let me know in the comments and tell me what you've been reading this summer. What's floated your boat over these hot summer months? If you liked this video, please do hit the like button. It really helps the channel out. And if you'd like to see more of me, then hit the subscribe button. But until next time, toodles.